The hum of the orbital station was something you didn't notice until the rare times it stuttered. A vibration running through steel and recycled air, a constant companion that reminded everyone living there that they were far from home, clinging to a fragile shell of metal and stubborn engineering. For Jalen, it had become background noise long ago, but today his nerves made it louder, as if the station itself was waiting for him to make a fool of himself. He was tightening the last coupling on a maintenance panel, sweat sticking his dark hair to his forehead, when she walked in. Not floated, not stumbled, but walked, with a precision that made every other crew member seem clumsy by comparison. The alien woman's boots touched the floor like she had rehearsed each step, and her long ears angled slightly back, twitching with tiny movements that might have been annoyance, or maybe amusement. Jalen had no idea. He had spent the last 3 weeks pretending to know what he was doing around her kind, while secretly wondering if their ears were sensitive enough to pick up his heart hammering in his chest. She stopped right beside him and bent gracefully to inspect the same panel. Her hair, silvery in the artificial light, brushed past his shoulder. "You call that sealed," she said, her voice carrying the same sharpness as a blade being drawn. Jalen grinned the way humans do when they don't have a real answer. "It's sealed enough that the air won't escape and kill us all. That's what I call a success." Her eyes narrowed, a shade too bright to be comfortable. "Sloppy work invites disaster. You should know that." And then, because he never could resist filling silence with words, he added without thinking, "Funny coming from someone who looks like she'd never lift anything heavier than a comb." The air in the corridor changed. One technician froze mid-step, tools clattering to the floor. Another coughed loudly, as though to distract from the echo of Jalen's words. The alien woman went still, her long ears stiffening as though someone had pulled invisible strings. Her eyes shifted toward him, not in anger, not yet, but in a way that promised he had stepped somewhere dangerous. Jalen tried to save himself with a laugh. "You know. Just joking." "Joking," she repeated, tasting the word like it was a chemical she had never encountered. "Yes," he said quickly, waving his wrench like a flag of surrender. "You know, humor. Sarcasm. We humans do it all the time. Builds character. Prevents ulcers. Keeps us from throwing ourselves out the airlock on long shifts." Her expression didn't change. For a moment, he thought she might actually call security, or worse, deliver one of those cutting remarks that left a man questioning his existence for days. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, ears flicking once. "You mock my body," she said calmly, "and then claim this is recreation." Jalen swallowed. "Exactly. A recreational insult. Very popular back home." The silence that followed stretched on long enough for the hum of the station to return in full force. And then, unexpectedly, a sound escaped her, a short, clipped laugh, like someone who had never laughed before and wasn't sure of the mechanics. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't deadly either. Around them, the crew began to breathe again. One of the engineers muttered, "Lucky bastard," under his breath and shuffled away before she could hear. She straightened, her voice returning to its sharp edge. "You are either very foolish or very brave. Possibly both." "I get that a lot," Jalen said, relief making him reckless again. "Usually right before someone decides to punch me." She blinked at him, then actually smiled, a fleeting curve of lips that looked more dangerous than her glare. "I don't need to punch you. I can simply watch you trip over your own words until you collapse." The rest of the shift became an awkward dance. She worked with the same flawless precision as always, and Jalen tried to mimic her movements, only to drop a conduit wrench that bounced off the floor with an embarrassing clang. She raised an eyebrow. "I thought humans claimed higher dexterity than this." "We do," Jalen shot back, crouching to retrieve it. "Just not when someone's staring at us with ears that can probably hear our bones creak." That earned him another of those strange, reluctant laughs. Short, restrained, but undeniably real. By the time the panel was finally sealed to her exacting standards, the tension had shifted into something else. Not exactly friendship, not exactly hostility, but an odd middle ground that left Jalen strangely energized. As she turned to leave, her silver hair catching the glow of the corridor lights, she paused just long enough to throw one last remark over her shoulder. "Next time you insult my body," she said, "try to be more creative. Otherwise, this so-called joking will become tedious." Jalen grinned despite himself. "Deal. I'll start working on new material tonight. Maybe something about your ears." Her ears twitched sharply, and for one heart-stopping second he thought he had gone too far again. Then she shook her head and walked away, her steps as precise as ever. Left alone in the corridor, Jalen leaned back against the humming wall and muttered to himself, "Congratulations, genius. You just made history. First human to survive calling an alien woman delicate." The wall vibrated beneath him, carrying the sound of laughter from the technicians down the hall. He couldn't tell if they were laughing with him or at him. Either way, the station suddenly felt a little less lonely. Jalen decided the only thing worse than offending an alien woman with long ears was waking up the next day and realizing you had no idea how to apologize. He lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling panel, which flickered in that way the maintenance report swore didn't happen. The station hummed around him, engines shifting power in subtle rhythms that most people ignored. But he wasn't listening to the engines. He was listening to the sound of his own brain repeatedly replaying the moment when he compared her to someone too delicate to lift a comb. By breakfast, he had convinced himself he needed a plan. Step 1, understand her culture. Step 2, prove he wasn't an idiot. Step 3, somehow avoid getting thrown into the recycling unit. The mess hall was busy, filled with humans and aliens alike, each group sticking mostly to their own kind. Jalen spotted her immediately, not because she stood out, though she did, silver hair catching every glimmer of artificial light, but because every other human in the hall seemed to look away from her on purpose, as though eye contact might result in spontaneous combustion. She sat with a few of her crew, long ears angled toward one another as they spoke in their flowing language, which sounded to Jalen like wind moving through glass. He sat across from her before his brain could stop him. She looked up, expression unreadable, a forkful of something green and glowing halfway to her mouth. "You," she said flatly. "Me," Jalen agreed, already regretting everything. "So, listen. About yesterday. The whole comb thing." Her ears shifted slightly, a twitch that might have been irritation. Or curiosity. He was still hopeless at reading them. "I've been doing research," he said quickly, pulling a datapad from his pocket. "About your customs. Turns out, you don't joke about bodies. Or about ears. Or about, well, most things." Her gaze flicked to the screen, then back to him. "And yet you continue to do so." "That was an accident," he insisted. "Human mouths move faster than human brains. It's a biological flaw. Scientists are working on it." The corner of her lips almost twitched, which he took as progress. Emboldened, he added, "Anyway, I want to learn. So maybe you could teach me. You know, what not to say before I accidentally propose marriage or declare war or something." The alien woman studied him for a long moment, as if deciding whether he was worth her time. Finally, she set down her fork. "You wish to understand my culture?" "Yes. Or at least enough to not die horribly." "Then we begin now." She gestured to his plate. "What is that?" Jalen looked down at his breakfast. "Pancakes." She leaned closer, nose wrinkling. "They smell like insulation foam." "That's accurate," Jalen admitted. "But if you cover them in enough syrup, you hardly notice." "Your species eats insulation foam with syrup," she said, deadpan. "Only on Tuesdays." Her ears twitched again, and this time he was almost certain it was amusement. The lesson continued throughout the day. She corrected the way he stood when speaking to her people, scolded him for interrupting, and made him repeat phrases in her language until his throat felt like sandpaper. Every time he got something wrong. And he got most things wrong, she delivered a cutting remark that left the surrounding technicians chuckling under their breath. But instead of feeling humiliated, Jalen found himself laughing too. There was a rhythm to their exchanges, a strange back and forth where her sharpness and his self-deprecation balanced each other. By the time they reached the power grid, the station itself decided to add to his troubles. The conduit array flickered, lights dimming as the emergency systems kicked in. Alarms hooped overhead. Perfect, Jalen muttered. Another normal day in paradise. She crouched by the panel, already pulling tools from her kit. The secondary regulator is failing. If it goes, so does this entire section. Good thing you've got me, he said, kneeling beside her. Expert in breaking things further. You inspire little confidence, she replied dryly, handing him a coil spanner. Confidence is overrated. Improvisation, that's the human specialty. Their teamwork was chaotic. She worked with precise movements, double-checking every connection, while Jalen dove in with quick adjustments and half-baked ideas. At one point, he jammed his hand into the conduit and yelped as a spark singed his glove. She raised an eyebrow. You enjoy electrocuting yourself? Just testing the voltage. With my nerves. Very scientific. For the first time, she laughed without restraint, a quick, sharp burst that startled both of them. She covered it with a cough, but it was too late. Jalen grinned. See? I knew I could make you laugh. You did not, she insisted. It was, reflex. Sure, Jalen said. A reflex called finding me hilarious. Despite his antics, the repairs slowly came together. The grid stabilized, the alarms ceased, and the lights brightened to their normal sterile glow. She stood, brushing dust from her uniform, and gave him a look that was almost approving. You are reckless, she said. But not entirely useless. Jalen beamed. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. As they left the power bay, the other technicians whispered and chuckled behind their backs. Jalen didn't know what they were saying, but he caught the word bond more than once. He pretended not to notice, but the heat creeping up his neck betrayed him. She noticed too, of course. They think we are close. Well, we did just save them from asphyxiation, he said lightly. That counts as a bonding exercise. Her ears flicked, and she gave him that almost smile again. If this is bonding, human, then I fear what your species calls friendship. Messier, Jalen said. Much messier. Usually involves spilled drinks. She shook her head, muttering something in her language that sounded suspiciously like laughter. For the first time since his disastrous joke, Jalen felt the knot in his chest loosen. Maybe, just maybe, he hadn't ruined everything after all. The problem with gossip on a station was that it traveled faster than light. Jalen discovered this the hard way the morning he walked into the hangar and found 3 mechanics smirking at him like they knew something he didn't. By the time he reached his workbench, one of them had already called out, "Hey, lover boy, planning another maintenance date today?" Jalen froze, toolkit halfway open. Maintenance what? The mechanic grinned. You and the ear lady. Everyone's talking about it. Jalen almost dropped the kit. We fixed a conduit together. That's not a date. That's 2 people trying not to die in the dark. Sure, the mechanic said, drawing out the word until it carried more weight than gravity. Before Jalen could dig himself deeper, the sound of precise footsteps echoed across the hangar. She entered, silver hair gleaming, long ears angled with that calm intensity that made even hardened soldiers shuffle out of her path. The mechanics instantly pretended to be busy, as if they hadn't been openly mocking him 30 seconds earlier. She stopped at Jalen's side, expression unreadable. You are late. I'm early, he argued, checking his wrist display. Late, she repeated, and that was the end of it. They set to work preparing a shuttle for inspection, her movements as flawless as ever, his as chaotic as usual. Jalen tried to focus on the wiring, but the whispers of the mechanics still echoed in his ears. Finally, he blurted out, "So, apparently we're dating now." She paused mid-motion, turned her head slowly, and fixed him with a stare that could have frozen plasma. "Explain." Jalen rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, you see, humans talk. And when two people spend time together, fixing things, laughing, occasionally not killing each other, it looks like, more than it is." "More than what is?" He swallowed. "More than, teamwork." For a long, dreadful moment, she said nothing. Then her ears flicked, and she spoke with calm precision. "So your people interpret professional cooperation as a mating ritual?" "Not exactly," Jalen said quickly. "It's more like, a possibility. You know, proximity breeds assumptions." She tilted her head, studying him like he was a new kind of mold growing in her food tray. "Your species is strange." "Thank you," Jalen said. "We work hard at it." That earned him another of her short, sharp laughs, the kind that sounded like it surprised even her. Jalen grinned, feeling the knot in his stomach ease, until she added, "Perhaps I should confirm these rumors. It would save me the effort of correcting them." He choked. "Confirm them? As in, tell people we're—" "Yes," she said simply. "Then no one will ask foolish questions." "Right, because pretending to be involved would definitely stop gossip," Jalen muttered. She ignored his sarcasm and returned to her work, leaving him sputtering and the mechanics across the hangar nearly falling over themselves trying not to laugh. The rest of the day was no less bizarre. Every corridor seemed to buzz with the rumor. One passing officer gave Jalen a thumbs up. A medic winked. Even the station AI chimed in when he logged a maintenance report. Note, emotional entanglement may affect efficiency. Adjusting expectations accordingly. By the time evening came, Jalen was ready to crawl into the recycling chute and stay there. Instead, he found himself assigned to a scouting mission, just him and her, checking an abandoned relay satellite orbiting dangerously close to the station's perimeter. The shuttle ride was quiet at first, the hum of engines filling the silence. Jalen fidgeted with the controls while she sat perfectly still, eyes closed as though listening to something only she could hear. "You ever get tired of people staring at you?" he asked finally. Her ears twitched. "Why would I?" "Because it's exhausting," he said. "I mean, everywhere I go today, people are whispering about us." She opened her eyes and regarded him calmly. "You care too much about whispers. Let them talk. It changes nothing." "Easy for you to say," Jalen muttered. "They think I'm punching way above my weight class." She frowned. "Punching? Human phrase," he explained. "Means I don't deserve to be with someone as, well, impressive as you." Her gaze lingered on him, unreadable as ever. Finally, she said, "Your people waste much time on comparisons." "Yeah, well," Jalen said, grinning faintly, "when you're mediocre, you notice these things." To his relief, she gave that strange half-laugh again, softer this time, almost genuine. When they reached the relay satellite, the mood shifted. The structure drifted silently in orbit, its panels cracked, lights long dead. Docking was rough, ancient systems screeching in protest as they connected. Inside, the corridors were cold and hollow, their steps echoing too loudly in the silence. Jalen shivered. Creepy. Like walking into a ghost ship. "There are no ghosts," she said firmly. Spoken like someone who's never watched a human horror film. They moved carefully, checking for signs of life or malfunction. The place was a graveyard of machinery, dust motes drifting in the low light. Yet there was something oddly intimate about being there together, their voices the only sound in the void. When Jalen tripped over a loose conduit and landed flat on his back, she stopped, ears twitching. "You are remarkably ungraceful." "Thanks," he said, groaning. "I try to keep expectations low." She extended a hand, pulling him up with surprising strength. For a moment, he found himself closer to her than ever before, her silver hair catching the dim light, her gaze steady on his. Then she released him and stepped back as if nothing had happened. The rest of the inspection went smoothly, though Jalen couldn't shake the odd warmth in his chest. On the shuttle ride back, neither of them spoke much. But when the station lights came into view, she finally said, "If rumors help your people laugh, perhaps they serve a purpose." Jalen smirked. "Great. So now we're officially comedy material." Her ears flicked once. "Perhaps." He leaned back in his seat, grinning to himself despite the embarrassment. Maybe the gossip wasn't so unbearable after all. Jalen had faced power surges, loose conduits, and once a cleaning drone that mistook him for a spill, but nothing terrified him quite like walking into the docking bay and finding an entire diplomatic delegation waiting there. The banners were draped, the air smelled faintly of ozone from polished circuits, and the line of officials in elaborate uniforms looked like they'd been assembled solely to make him sweat. At the center of it all stood her, tall and composed, silver hair catching the overhead lights. Her long ears were angled with regal stillness, betraying nothing, but her eyes flicked toward him for the briefest second before returning to the diplomats. Jalen tried to slink away, but one of the human officers spotted him. "There he is," the officer announced far too loudly. "The human who's been involved." Jalen nearly tripped over his own boots. "Involved? With what?" "With her," the officer said, grinning like a man throwing a fellow soldier into the line of fire. A ripple of amusement moved through the alien delegation. They whispered in their melodic language, ears tilting toward one another like sails catching a strange wind. Jalen caught one word he'd learned from her lessons, a term dangerously close to courting. His stomach plummeted. The alien ambassador stepped forward, robes shimmering like woven starlight. He looked at Jalen, then at her, then back at Jalen again. "So," he said slowly, "this is the human who has chosen our daughter." Jalen's mouth fell open. "Wait. Daughter?" Her ears twitched once, sharply. "They exaggerate." "Exaggerate?" Jalen hissed under his breath. "They just promoted me from bumbling mechanic to suitor of interstellar royalty." The ambassador smiled thinly. "Is this not true?" Jalen opened and closed his mouth, words failing him for once. The room was silent, everyone waiting for his response. In desperation, he blurted, "I once compared her to someone who couldn't lift a comb." "Does that sound like courtship to you?" The humans gasped. The aliens gasped louder. For a horrifying second, Jalen thought he had doomed the station. Then, unexpectedly, laughter erupted. Not the nervous laughter of his crew, but a deep, ringing chorus from the alien delegates themselves. The ambassador chuckled, shaking his head. Humans. Always so reckless with words. "See?" Jalen said, seizing the opportunity. "Total accident. No romance here. Just cultural confusion and my incredible talent for humiliation." But then she spoke, her voice calm and deliberate. "Not entirely accident." Jalen spun toward her. "Not, what?" She met his gaze evenly, long ears perfectly still. "He speaks without thought, but he speaks honestly. There is no deception. That has value." The delegation murmured approval, and Jalen wanted to sink into the floor. He leaned closer and whispered, "You're not helping me here." "On the contrary," she whispered back, "I am protecting you. If they believe we are bonded, they will not question your place beside me." Jalen blinked. "Bonded? As in, married bonded?" Her lips curved ever so slightly. "Only temporarily." The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Jalen stood stiffly at her side, nodding whenever anyone looked his way, trying not to faint as alien officials made cryptic jokes about human endurance. When one of them asked how he had first impressed her, she answered, "He nearly electrocuted himself to test a conduit." "Very courageous." "Courageous?" Jalen sputtered. I screamed like a dying hovercart. The aliens laughed again, clearly charmed. Jalen wasn't sure if he should be relieved or terrified. After hours of formalities, the delegation finally dispersed. Jalen sagged against the bulkhead, exhausted. She stood beside him, perfectly composed as if nothing had happened. You realize, Jalen said, I'm never living this down. Half the station thinks we're dating. Now the other half thinks we're practically engaged. She tilted her head. Your people should be grateful. Our alliance strengthens with every rumor. Great, Jalen muttered. So my love life is now official foreign policy. Her ears twitched once, amusement hidden in the movement. You should take pride. Few humans could survive insulting my body and be rewarded with diplomacy. That's my legacy, Jalen groaned. Galactic peace, achieved through stupidity. They walked back toward the crew quarters, Jalen rubbing his temples, she gliding silently beside him. The tension was still there, unspoken but undeniable, wrapped in layers of misunderstanding and laughter. As they reached the lift, she surprised him by adding softly, it is not unpleasant, this arrangement. You make mistakes, but they are honest mistakes. And honesty is rare. Jalen stared at her, caught off guard. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Her lips twitched in that fleeting almost smile. Do not expect me to repeat it. The lift doors closed, carrying them upward. Jalen leaned against the wall, shaking his head with a laugh he couldn't quite suppress. Somehow, against all odds, his life had become stranger than fiction, and he wasn't entirely sure he wanted it any other way. The hangar smelled faintly of ozone and machine oil, which was oddly comforting given the chaos that had defined the last few days. Rin leaned against a crate half the size of a shuttle, breathing hard, hair still singed at the ends from the near-miss plasma discharge in the reactor chamber. He looked across the bay to see Kale, grinning like he'd just pulled off the greatest prank in galactic history, while Leora stood between them, her long ears twitching with either exasperation or amusement, he could never quite tell which. Well, Rin said, breaking the silence, on the plus side, no one died. He paused, frowned. The hangar smelled faintly of ozone and machine oil, which was oddly comforting given the chaos that had defined the last few days. Rin leaned against a crate half the size of a shuttle, breathing hard, hair still singed at the ends from the near-miss plasma discharge in the reactor chamber. He looked across the bay to see Kale, grinning like he'd just pulled off the greatest prank in galactic history, while Leora stood between them, her long ears twitching with either exasperation or amusement, he could never quite tell which. Well, Rin said, breaking the silence, on the plus side, no one died. He paused, frowned. Except for the drones, the console, 3 doors, and a very angry mop bucket. But no one important. That mop bucket served with dignity, Kale said solemnly, clutching his chest. It died in the line of duty. Leora tilted her head, watching them with that mixture of bemusement and disbelief she'd carried since the beginning of this unlikely partnership. You two are idiots. True, Rin admitted, but we're alive idiots. Which is a rare species, considering what we've been through. Alive, yes, but just barely. The Syndicate's ships were nothing but drifting wreckage now, thanks to their absurdly reckless plan to overload the power cores and trick the fleet into firing on itself. Somehow it had worked, though Rin suspected dumb luck had carried them as much as strategy. The galaxy wouldn't be singing songs about their brilliance anytime soon, but maybe, just maybe, it would stop burning for a while. He caught Leora's gaze, softer now than it had been when they first met. Back then, she had been distant, every word edged with suspicion. But after corridors filled with fire, laughter in the face of death, and arguments over whether Kale's improvised bomb was genius or lunacy, something had shifted. She had shifted. You don't regret it? Rin asked her quietly, almost afraid of the answer. She blinked. Which part? The explosions, the betrayal, or watching you two try to fly a fighter like it was a kitchen appliance? The whole journey, he said, scratching the back of his neck. Being stuck with us. Trusting us. Leora's lips curved, just slightly. I thought humans were loud, clumsy, and reckless. And? Kale asked, leaning forward eagerly. I was right, she said, deadpan, but her eyes sparkled. But you're also stubborn. Loyal. Ridiculous. And impossible to ignore. Rin let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was something better, it was trust. The sound of boots echoed from the corridor. A squad of uniformed officers entered the hangar, their insignia bright with the crest of the new Provisional Council. One of them, a stern woman with steel-gray hair, stepped forward. Captain Rin Hale, she said. Engineer Kale. Envoy Leora. You're wanted in the council chambers immediately. There are discussions to be had. Discussions, Kale muttered. That's diplomat code 4, you've broken half the galaxy, now explain yourselves. Rin shrugged. Could be worse. Worse? Kale repeated, aghast. The last time we had discussions, I ended up married to a vending machine in 3-star systems. Do you know how many angry letters I got? Leora's shoulders shook with barely suppressed laughter. You actually went through with the vows. It was either that or get shot. Kale protested. Don't judge me. They followed the officers out, stepping into a council chamber carved from pale crystalline walls that glowed faintly with embedded circuits. Representatives of half a dozen worlds sat in curved tiers, murmuring as the trio approached. Some looked furious, some awed, and some simply exhausted. The gray-haired officer gestured for silence. These 3, she said, her voice carrying, were responsible for ending the syndicate's stranglehold on the sector. Their methods were unconventional. A ripple of laughter spread through the chamber. But their results speak for themselves. The council owes them a debt. Rin shifted uncomfortably. He had never liked spotlights. Give him a broken engine, a bad joke, and a long night under the stars, that was enough. But as he looked at Leora, who now stood with her chin lifted proudly, and Kale, who waved to the crowd like he was on stage at a comedy club, he realized something important. The journey had changed him. He had started as a soldier with nothing but orders to follow, carrying bitterness like a second skin. Now, he wasn't just surviving, he was choosing. Choosing who to stand with, what to fight for, and when to laugh, even when everything seemed impossible. When the chamber erupted into applause, Rin didn't flinch or duck his head. He just